We're all set to go here. And he's called Play Through.
Kia ora team, Talo Palava, and welcome back to another episode of Play Through, the 7th Touch podcast. I am your host, Tivoli Guthrie, and I really appreciate you all for taking the time out of your day to join me for another episode of this, wherever you're based around the touch football world. And just quickly, I also want to say I appreciate those of you who have jumped onto the 7th Touch website and picked up a 6-week training program. They've been flying out the door since World Cup finished, but a 6-week training program designed by touchies, for touchies, helping you to get fitter, faster, stronger, specifically for touch football. So if you're looking for some guidance in terms of your touch football training, or you are looking to freshen up your current training regimen, for example, head to the shop section on the 7th Touch website, that's 7touch.com, and you'll find a 6-week training program that you can purchase, download, and it is yours to keep forever for you to refer to whenever you want. But if you're looking for more ways to improve or develop your touch football game, help isn't too far away. We've got a few extra projects that are not too far off being completed, so keep your eyes peeled for that. That's something that we're really excited about. Hopefully we'll help our touch community out as well. But today, though, what are we talking about? Well, we're still dealing with the fallout from the Touch World Cup. Last week we had a sort of general overview of the entire tournament, a really well-run tournament by England Touch in conjunction with FIT, and we also went over some of the Masters results as well. But today and over the next couple of weeks, we'll be talking strictly open grades, just as we did leading up to the World Cup. We'll go over the mixed open grade today, followed by the women's open grade, and then we'll finish off with the men's open grade, and that'll be our coverage for the 2024 Touch World Cup done and dusted. But yeah, it was a phenomenal event. If you haven't already, check out last week's episode. We sort of just went over some of the highlights, as well as potential areas of improvement, and sort of, just ran the rule over the Masters grades. So today we'll kick things off with the Mixed Open, which I thought was a really, really competitive grade. Some really quality matches, a high standard, and I suppose while the final may have been predictable, I think the path to get to the final was anything but. I think the addition of the round of 16 as well as the quarterfinals, extending that out from where previously it was just the semifinals heading into the gold medal match, I think that was perfect. I think it just added an extra competitive edge and just an extra layer to the tournament, which gave us some tense matches, some dramatic matches, some dramatic finishes, and just sort of built that suspense, which made for some really compelling viewing. I wasn't there in person, but just watching on the live stream from home, it was really thrilling to watch. So kudos to all of the teams that took part. There were 29 in total across the mixed grade, which is easily the biggest grade that we've had in the largest amount of teams that we've had in a single grade in touch football World Cup history. I think just because of the addition of the round of 16 and the quarterfinals, I think it just added a little extra something to the round robin games, which was highlighted from the very get-go. The very first game of the tournament in the Mixed Open that was on the live stream was between England and France. Two of the, I'd say, more favoured teams or more fancied teams that were tipped to progress as top of their pool in Pool D and head to the round of 16 stage and advance further. It was, I don't know whether grudge match is the right word, but it definitely was a high quality one between two of Europe's best sides. We got a glimpse of the hosts early on, and I think they had an excellent tournament, capped off with the bronze medal as well. France, I think they put up a fight, but they'd be left to rue the loss of Maël Pan, who headed into the tournament. He came into the tournament under an injury cloud. I think he tore his hamstring a couple of weeks out from the tournament, which is never nice. And if you know anything about hamstring injuries, they're really pesty. Just one of those injuries that have a high re-injury rate, especially within the first sort of 4 to 8 weeks. And unfortunately, that was the case in Maël's situation, where midway through the first half of the opening match, he went to change direction on the try line, defensively, and I think their hamstring went again. So, that was a real blow for the French. But as I mentioned, they did put up a fight. They only went down 13-6, which, you can only imagine the impact that Maël Pan would have had on the French outfit. But, it did make for a really interesting game first up. Two of the more fancied opponents getting thrown in together. It was basically a match to decide who would have gone and progressed through as top of the pool. But it was an amazing match and really set the tone for the mixed grade. A couple of other round robin games that I was really intrigued by was the Australia-Philippines game, which was on the first round on the second day. Philippines I tipped as a potential dark horse in the mixed open grade heading into the tournament, and Australia obviously heavy gold medal favourites. So seeing those two face off was really intriguing as well. Australia ended up running out pretty convincing winners. It was 13-2 in the end, but I think more than anything it really signalled Australia's intent right from the get-go. They came out all guns blazing, and with such a competitive game first up, they wanted to make a statement, and they did so. Philippines, I think, they went down in that first game, but they just sort of built as the tournament progressed. They had some really solid round games, and then a few nail biters in terms of the knockout games, which we'll get to. And they ended up finishing fourth and making that bronze medal match, which was pretty amazing for such a young squad. The Italy versus USA game was another one that was really gripping. I think it was 10-9 the final score, and it was just tit for tat the entire time. Simon Walsh and Kaya Little were outstanding for the US, and then for the Italians, you had Giacomo Alaria, who really put on a clinic. I think he scored a hat-trick in the game, set up another maybe 4 or 5, and out of 10 tries, you can do the math, how many tries he was responsible for. So a really great game, a surprise winner. I don't know. Well, I think the Americans would have been disappointed by the end result. I think they would have gone into that match expecting to win. But the Italians, I think they were a real surprise package, in that Pool A. They ended up finishing third behind Australia and the Philippines. So, a really spirited performance from the Italians. I thought they did really, really well. Germany, South Africa was another good game to watch, a high-scoring one. Both teams going in with a 2-loss, 1-win record, and it was really make or break to see who would progress from that pool. And Germany, another surprise winner over the top of probably the more fancied South Africans. Germany came out on top to progress through to the round of 16. And then the last matches to finish in Pool D between Belgium and Canada and Chile and Switzerland, with 3 of those teams vying for one round of 16 spot, which made for, some pretty thrilling finishes because they both finished in draws. A win from either of those teams would have put them in the box seat to qualify for the round of 16. But as it turned out, Belgium and Canada drew 8-all. Chile drew with Switzerland 3-all. And as a result, Belgium went through as well. Yet another surprise package. So I think that round of 16, as I mentioned, really did add an extra competitive edge to the round games. Just a huge shout out to the nations that, to be fair, I didn't tip to progress past the pool stages, but they exceeded expectations. And, you look at the likes of your Germanys, of your Belgiums, Jersey was another one, Italy, and Malaysia as well, who was another one. They did really well to get out of their pool and qualify for that round of 16. So top 16 in the world in a 2019 competition. No easy feat, and those teams did really well to progress to the knockout stages. I did say in the mixed open preview that any nations that could, prove any of those predictions wrong, I would be more than happy to, and I definitely am happy to concede that to those nations. They performed really well in the round robin games. None of them progressed past the round of 16, unfortunately, but I think just having them in that round of 16 just is just reward for them. But heading into the knockout stages, Japan and Italy was one of the highlights of that round of 16. Real tit-for-tat game. Japan ended up coming out on top with a 10-8 win. But the game of the round was easily Philippines-Scotland. Another one where, you had sort of contrasting styles. And I think Philippines, throughout their knockout stages came up against teams who really contrasted their style. They play that sort of exuberant, off-the-cuff kind of style. They relied on some of their individuals to really break the game open, the likes of Damon van der Velde and Jacob Richter, and then they had the experience of your Alan Shines and your Tim Schenkins, the skipper, and Kim Solman as well. So they had a really balanced squad, and then they came up against Scotland, who qualified from Pool B, and it just was a really great game to watch. It was tit for tat. Rory Grant was a standout for the Scottish. And just a back and forth game that, really no one gave an inch. And in the end, it was decided by a single try. 10-9 was the final score. Went to the Philippines, and they progressed to the quarterfinals where they went on to face Wales. So that game was another, match of the round. And Philippines at this stage were really doing it tough, winning by one in the round of 16, and then coming up against the European champions in Wales in the quarterfinal as well, where that game went right down to a drop-off. Philippines scored first in the drop-off. They had first use of the football, and then Wales, in their right of reply, couldn't manage to find the equaliser. So a really high-scoring affair. 11-10 was the final score, and Philippines managing to progress through. I think Wales would be perhaps a little bit disappointed that they couldn't progress through to that top four. I think they were really gunning for top four at least, and a bronze medal finish at best. But they're still a pretty young squad. The core of their squad has been intact for a couple of years, and we'll see if they can keep that intact, progressing towards 2028 when the World Cup is held in New Zealand. Japan and England played another thrilling quarterfinal. I think England showed their class once they got up by a couple, which was relatively late in the game. It was another seesawing battle throughout the first half, and then England really only managed to pull away in the last sort of 5 to 7 minutes, where they ended up winning by 3. But the Japanese put up one heck of a fight, and it really held England in good stead heading towards an Australian semi-final opponent, and then, as it turned out to be, a Filipino opponent in the bronze medal match. New Zealand easily dispatched of France, who I thought did well to get to the quarterfinal stage despite losing Mael Pan early on. And then the Australian-Lebanese game was another good game to watch as well. You wouldn't be able to pick it from the first half. Australia, they raced out to a 6-0 lead at half-time, but coming out of the second half, I think the Lebanese really upped the ante. They put a little bit more pressure on Australia, and they really made Australia work hard for every try that they got from there on out. So 6-0 at halftime. The final score only ended up being 13-5. So, a 7-5 scoreline in 20 minutes of football. I think as a Lebanese team, I think you'd be pretty happy with that, despite the loss. The semi-finals, I think they were quite one-sided. Australia managed to dispose of England, and then the Kiwis managed to get over the top of the Philippines as well and progress through to that gold medal match. The third and fourth match was another good one to watch. I think Philippines just had a massive go of it, playing 3 of Europe's best mixed open teams within the space of about 4 games. As well as New Zealand. So they did really well to reach that third and fourth playoff, but I think in the end, class shone through for the English. They just showed their class, as I mentioned, as well as their experience. One thing I did notice with the English, and it was quite an interesting thing, was it seems as though, they're trying to, I suppose just push the boundaries on what's possible in touch footy. And the reason I say that is because in touch football, especially mixed touch football, your typical game day squad of 14 consists of 9 males and 5 females. Now, your 9 males, you'll typically have 3 pods of 3 males, and they will, work as sort of separate entities. And then your female links, you'll have 2 of them that'll just sort of sub on and off as subbing partners. And then your wings, you'll usually have 3 of them, and they just sort of rotate the wing positions. what I thought was interesting with England was that they had the same setup of 9 males, 5 females, but they carried 3 female links as opposed to 2 female links. And the reason I thought that was interesting was because what that does is it allows them to play as a pot of 4, and instead of playing that, very heavy, 3 male dominated team, they really expanded that out to play as a pot of 4. Now, I mentioned in the preview that they really like to get their females involved, the likes of Anna Crossley, Danielle Evans, and they really like to allow them to shoulder some of that attacking load. And so by having a pot of 4, they can essentially work as your insides and then your 2 wingers. Now, on the flip side, what that does is that does leave you with 2 wingers who essentially have to play 40 minutes straight, which in international touch football isn't an easy thing to do. So, massive shout out to Ella Loveridge, M. Crow out on the wings for England. They did it tough. I think they played, it might have even been 3 or 4 straight games where they were out on the wings for full games in an international. So, really ballsy move there from Coach Justin Conway, and huge kudos to the players. Obviously, that tactic played in their favour, reaching the bronze medal match and coming away with what ended up being England's very first medal in an open grade at a Touch World Cup, which is a monumental achievement for them, and to do it at their own home World Cup as well. Just really, just a massive achievement. And I think things are looking up for them as a Tier 1 nation heading towards the next World Cup in 2028. The last game of the tournament, though, in the mixed open grade, the mixed open grand final. And yet again, it was the old foes doing battle, Australia up against New Zealand. Interestingly, so the game ended up going into drop-off. Interestingly, the only mixed open final that has been decided in a drop-off, and only the second ever open grade grand final that has gone to a drop-off. So, if that doesn't speak volumes as to the closeness between these two sides, I don't know what will. The game tapped off. It was fast. It was intense. So fast, in fact, that New Zealand were given a 7-touch set in their second set of the game. I'm not sure how many of us picked that up, but just the game was incredibly fast. Both sides came out running. I thought Wilson Groth was great for Australia early on. I thought Mackenzie Davis really stepped up, the young lady from Australia. I was a little bit surprised with the selection to go with Mackenzie Davis over Jess Potts. I thought Jess Potts had a great Trans-Tasman series last year, but it just showed, Coach Dave Nolan's confidence in these young rookies. They sent out Zach Bazunas and Chris Lennon, who played as part of one pod, and 3 debutants as well as Kyson Boland all starting the grand final, and just being in that environment, I think is a real tip of the hat as coach to have that confidence in his young players. For New Zealand, I thought Tama Hawken, Ben Anderson, Nathan Rollinson, I thought that pod was really dangerous. They, in terms of Tama Hawken and Ben Anderson, they played that selfless sort of football where they put Nate Rollinson in the position to strike, and they were letting him dominate the strike. And I thought that was, really smart play at the end of the day, because, he ended up scoring 2 in the final. He had a great first half, Nate Rollinson, and Tama Hawken and Ben Anderson, they were just smart about the situations that they would give the ball to him in. Real smart operators of the game, Hawken and Anderson, and, that pod ended up contributing 5 tries in the final when they scored 7. So, a really dangerous pod for New Zealand. But Australia, they came out early, came out hard, and they pounced to a 3-1 lead early on. And, I thought that was Australia making a statement, as they did in the first game against the Philippines, just coming out hard, coming out early and making a statement. And, pouncing to that 3-1 lead. It isn't so much detrimental, and it's nothing to panic over, especially when it's midway through the first half. But I think it does speak volumes as to the type of game that they wanted to play. They wanted to play fast. They wanted to play sort of up-tempo. And they were rewarded with an early lead. New Zealand, they weren't phased though. They managed to peg it back, and they scored 3 on the trot to lead by 1. But the critical point in the first half, in my opinion, is minute 18. And you might think, well, what significance does that have? Well, Australia leading 3-1 early, and then New Zealand pegging it back slowly. They pegged it back 1 by 1. Rollinson scored, then Tutui Tuta scored, then Atawhai Hōtene scored, and scoring 3 on the bounce to go from a 2-try deficit to being up by 1 is huge in the context of the game. And the reason I come back to minute 18 is because minute 17 is when Atawhai Hōtene scores for New Zealand. Australia off the tap-off, get down to the 7-metre line. Tia McIntyre comes up with a huge touch on James Hegedus. And then New Zealand yard up the field in minute 18. They get Avion Jones to come around on a sweep. He steps back to engage the safe side. Double pumps, beautiful short ball to Alex Howarth, who goes through untouched. But unfortunately for New Zealand, it's called back for a forward pass. And then as a result, Australia, they get the tap off. They get down to the 7-metre line in 4 touches. And then on a static 5th and final, Zach Bazunas scores, I would say, a relatively soft try by New Zealand standards. Those 5th and final tries aren't ones that you typically want to let in. And what that did is, instead of New Zealand going into the halftime break up by 2, they go into the halftime break even Stevens, and it is 4-4 heading into halftime. I think the reason it is such a critical point is because the confidence that you would get in a gold medal match heading into halftime up against the defending world champions by 2, that would have been huge for the Kiwis. And then especially when you consider coming out of the halftime break, they managed to score first as well through Tama Hawkins. So, a 2-try, potentially 3-try lead in the early stages of the second half. Australia staring down the barrel of a 3-try deficit with 15 minutes left to play, I think would have been, really, really compelling viewing. And unfortunately for New Zealand, that's not the way that it went. Australia managed to go into the half even Stevens, and then they just stayed with the Kiwis for the duration of the second half. So it did continue, that seesawing battle, and it was great to watch. It was some awesome mixed open touch. I thought Australia's patience in terms of when to pull out their big plays was, quite key for them. They scored 2 using that starter play, which I thought was an awesome play to look at. You had Wilson Groth, Jackson Mills, Andrew Searle as that sort of male pod for Australia, and they go in for a county. So at a 32 ruck, they split in for a quickie, but instead of giving it to the quickie, they had the third male coming in between them, and sort of like running essentially a splitter, but at a 32 ruck. And then when he comes through, it's an early release to the person who dumped and split, which essentially makes it in a similar vein to a 32 peel. So, really interesting move by Australia, one that, you see glimpses of here and there, but not executed to that standard. And they managed to score 2 tries off it in the second half. That first one, that was a thing of beauty, where it was just an early release, catch pass, long ball out to the wing. And, it was just a great play to watch. I think what Australia did well coming out of the halftime break was how they defended Nate Rollinson. As I mentioned, he was dangerous in the first half, scoring a double and really using his speed to force Australia into situations that they didn't typically want. Those ones where he would sweep around the back of the ruck, get that wide angle, but deep enough so that he can sort of change and come right down the lane and dive at their feet. He scored 2 tries in that way. And what they did coming out of the second half is they wanted to get really aggressive and really push high on that strike touch. And by doing so, they made the touch, instead of being on the 7 meter line, they made it out sort of 9-10 meters out, which really takes away Rollinson's dive. And what they also did, as well as getting the high touch out there aggressively, is they crowded the ruck, crowded the lanes that he could dive through. And what that forced Nate Rollinson to do is to look away from the dive and look to use his distributing game, which, he was found out as it not being, as strong as probably he would have liked. And he came up with some, pretty poor decisions in the second half, unfortunately for New Zealand, because he had a great first half. But I think that just is a testament to Australia's communication and the message that was sent at halftime, and the threat that Nate Rollinson provides for New Zealand. It was tit for tat for the first 10 minutes. The score ended up being 7-7 at 31 minutes, and then it went scoreless from the 31st right through to full time. So a huge grind from minutes 31 to 40. The huge turning point of the second half, though, was with just under 5 minutes left, Tama Hawken, who I thought was New Zealand's best on ground. You talk about Rollinson being that strike for New Zealand, but I think Hawken did really well to, put him in some of those positions alongside Ben Anderson. He scored a try himself as well, and he was huge defensively. He was immense defensively for New Zealand, came up with some really important touches and really important defensive plays. And with just under 5 minutes left, Rollinson sweeps around the back of the ruck. Anderson at dummy half gives it back to Hawken. He goes to step off his left foot, and he just crumbles to the ground. And you can just hear a pin drop around the ground. The atmosphere was completely sucked out of the grounds. Never a good look when a player goes down in a non-contact injury like that, especially when it's one changing direction. I'm not sure of the extent of the injury, but it didn't look good. So just a huge shout out to Tama Hawken, and hope he's doing well in terms of his recovery. The reason that was a huge turning point in the game, though, is because of the success of that pod. That pod, as I mentioned, was the most dangerous for New Zealand, in my opinion. They contributed 5 tries out of their 7, and to go down at that late juncture of the match, especially when, the result from that happened to be a New Zealand repeat set of 6, you just wonder whether, if Hawken hadn't have gone down, whether they would have been able to come up with a big play with a fresh set of 6 on the 7 meter line. As a result, though, they didn't score, and the result stayed the same until the end of the match. And then as soon as that halftime hooter, you could hear the groans from the crowd. They knew a drop-off was coming. And interestingly, coming out of the full-time huddle, New Zealand send out Mariana Winiana, Ben Anderson, Alex Howarth, and then Kira Fisher, who was a link throughout the game. Now, when you talk about, the minute decisions in a gold medal match, I do wonder whether New Zealand would have fared better having 2 female wingers out there, just because of how much space they have to cover. And links, they're typically used to being in just a little bit tighter, especially in the mixed game. The female links being in a little bit tighter and just holding space for the males, which, Kira Fisher did really well throughout the game. She came up with a really important touch in the second half on Wilson Groth when he came around on a sweep at one point. But in a drop-off scenario when there's 50 metres to cover between 4 players, I do wonder whether having a winger out there would have served them better. As it turned out, Zach Bazunas, Chris Lennon come out for Australia, the 2 rookies. Just again speaks volumes as to the coach's trust with his young players. Bazunas skips out to the left-hand side, manages to hold Fisher long enough to get that draw and pass, and Australia score in the left-hand corner through Steph Mayolo. As their reply, Australia send out James Hegedus and Dan Langbridge, who weren't part of the same pod throughout the match, but they are familiar with each other's play from the last Trans-Tasman. And I think the key for them is just how aggressive they were in defence. And I think when you get to a 4-on-4 drop-off scenario, you kind of have to be aggressive, because, if you're timid and you're backtracking, that's the quickest way to let the attack just run over the top of you. So they did really well in forcing the issue. Nate Rollinson came on, Tian McIntyre came on, who I thought had a really strong game. And, Australia were just able to push the envelope defensively and keep New Zealand off the 7-metre line, where to the point where New Zealand only had 2 strikes at the line. So, a real gut-wrenching performance for New Zealand. Australia managed to, after scoring, they managed to win their 4th straight mixed open World Cup final. So a huge effort for them. It was a game for the ages, and I think out of the 3 open grades finals, that was the most exciting to watch. I think New Zealand probably didn't defend the sweep so well throughout the course of the match. Australia had so many half chances that they didn't convert that they typically would be expected to. So I think that the final result, they probably did deserve to win in the end, but again, in a World Cup final, when the coin can flip either side, it was such a close run thing. I feel for the Kiwis, but at the same time, congratulations to the Australians. A 4th World Cup title on the bounce, is an incredible achievement, and when you add that to the context of the tournament as well, where Australia won 12 of the 13 grades, just a great achievement from them. And we'll see whether New Zealand can bounce back at their home World Cup in 4 years' time. So overall, for the mixed grade, I thought it was really competitive, really compelling viewing, and a deserved winner in the end. So it'll be interesting to see how we go in 4 years' time. But that's sort of my thoughts on the mixed open grade. I was a little bit, I suppose, taken aback by how many people would flick through a message and ask my thoughts on each of the finals or each of the grades. So yeah, I just thought the best way to do it would be to jump on these podcasts and do one at a time. So mixed open will be today, and then next week we'll cover the women's open grade, and then last but not least, we'll cover the men's open grade as well. So that's me for the night. I really appreciate you all for tuning in. Hope to see you next time. Cheers.